Tonight, you will leave this house forever. The words fell into the quiet room like a door closing on everything Clara Whitmore had ever known. She stood beneath the warm glow of the family estate, holding a small bag with the few belongings she was allowed to keep, while the people around her looked at her as if she were a problem finally being removed. For 22 years, Clara had lived in the Whitmore household, carrying the name of a noble family but never feeling like she truly belonged. She was an Omega in a world that valued power, and her gentle nature was often mistaken for weakness. She healed small wounds, comforted frightened villagers, and cared for those who had nowhere else to turn. Yet inside her own home, her kindness was treated as something worthless. Her stepmother, Victoria Hayes, stood at the center of the room with a calm expression that made Clara's heart feel heavy. "You should be grateful," Victoria said. "At least now your existence will serve a purpose." Clara looked at the woman who had raised her after her father's passing. She searched for even a small sign of regret, but found none. For years, Clara had tried to earn Victoria's approval. She had worked quietly, avoided conflict, and accepted every cold word with patience. She never imagined the person she called family would be the one to decide her future without asking what she wanted. Outside the estate, a carriage waited under the evening sky. The servants whispered among themselves, but Clara ignored them. She lifted her chin and walked forward with the same quiet dignity she had carried through every difficult moment. She was afraid. She was uncertain. But she refused to let fear take away the last thing she still owned, her self-respect. Far beyond the Whitmore lands in the northern Wolf Kingdom, Alpha King Alexander Ravensshire stood inside the grand halls of his castle, reviewing reports from different territories. He was a ruler known for fairness, but he had grown tired of seeing people use tradition as an excuse to ignore compassion. His kingdom was powerful, yet Alexander believed a true leader was measured by how they treated those with the least power. When news arrived about a political arrangement involving an Omega from a noble family, he expected another agreement built on ambition and advantage. He did not expect the person arriving at his castle to change the way he viewed destiny itself. Clara did not know where she was being taken. She did not know what waited beyond the gates of the Northern Kingdom. All she knew was that the family she trusted had given her away as if she had no feelings, no dreams, and no future of her own. But as the carriage moved beneath the moonlit sky, Clara held on to one belief that Victoria could never take from her. Her worth was not decided by those who failed to see it. And somewhere ahead, the Alpha King who everyone feared was about to meet the Omega everyone had forgotten. The journey to the Northern Wolf Kingdom felt longer than any distance Clara Whitmore had ever traveled. As the carriage moved through endless forests and quiet valleys, she watched the familiar lands of her childhood disappear behind her. She wondered if anyone at the Whitmore estate would notice her absence. The thought faded quickly because deep inside she already knew the answer. For years, she had lived among people who saw her presence but never truly saw her. When Clara finally arrived at the gates of the Northern Kingdom, she expected cold judgment and unfamiliar faces. Instead, she found a kingdom filled with order and quiet strength. The castle stood beneath the evening sky, its towering walls reflecting the power of the Alpha King who ruled within. The guards greeted her respectfully, but their expressions remained curious. Everyone knew an Omega from a noble family was arriving, but few understood why. Clara lowered her gaze not because she was ashamed, but because she had learned that drawing attention often brought unwanted questions. Inside the castle, she was guided through grand halls filled with history. Portraits of past leaders lined the walls, reminding her of a world she had never been allowed to enter. She felt small among such greatness, but she reminded herself that a place did not define her value. Meanwhile, Alexander Ravensshire reviewed the details of the arrangement that had brought Clara to his kingdom. He had expected another political agreement created by families seeking influence. He had seen many powerful houses use tradition to hide their true intentions. But something about this situation felt different. The reports mentioned Clara's name, yet they contained very little about her achievements. Instead, they focused on her status as an Omega and the advantage her family hoped to gain. Alexander noticed the absence of something important: respect. He closed the documents and looked toward the castle entrance. "Bring her to me," he said calmly. When Clara entered the royal chamber, She expected to see a ruler who viewed her as another responsibility placed on his shoulders. Instead, she found a man watching her with careful attention, as if he was trying to understand the person behind the rumors. Alexander studied her quietly. She did not demand sympathy. She did not complain about the family who abandoned her. She simply stood there with a calm expression despite everything she had lost. "Do you understand why you were brought here?" Alexander asked. Clara took a moment before answering. "I understand that my family made a decision for me." Her voice was soft, but there was no bitterness in it. "But I still hope I can choose who I become." Those words surprised him. Most people who arrived at his castle wanted something: protection, power, recognition. Clara wanted none of those things. She only wanted the chance to remain herself. For the first time in years, Alexander wondered if he had been looking in the wrong places for true strength. The Omega standing before him had arrived without a title, without influence, and without anyone fighting for her. Yet somehow, she carried herself with more dignity than many leaders he had met. And Alexander Ravensshire began to suspect that Clara Whitmore was not the powerless person everyone believed her to be. The days following Clara Whitmore's arrival at the Northern Wolf Kingdom were unlike anything she had ever experienced. She had expected to feel like a stranger, someone who did not belong among powerful leaders and ancient traditions. Instead, she discovered something unexpected. No one forced her to remain silent. No one reminded her that she was only an Omega. For the first time in many years, Clara had space to breathe. She spent her mornings exploring the castle gardens, learning the names of the flowers that grew beneath the northern sunlight. The gardeners were surprised when she offered to help, but Clara simply smiled. She had always believed that every living thing deserved care, whether it was a person, a plant, or a forgotten corner of the world. Word of her kindness slowly traveled through the castle. The servants noticed how she thanked everyone who helped her. The guards noticed how she remembered their names. The kitchen staff noticed that she always asked if they had enough supplies before thinking about her own needs. Small actions revealed more about Clara than any official record ever could. Alexander Ravensshire observed these changes quietly. As Alpha King, he had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Many sought influence. Many sought protection. Many wanted their names connected to his power. Clara was different. She had entered his kingdom without asking for anything. She had been given every reason to become bitter, yet she continued choosing kindness. One afternoon, Alexander found Clara in the healing room of the castle. She was organizing herbs and preparing remedies for the servants who needed assistance. "You do not have to do this," Alexander said. Clara looked up with a gentle smile. "I know." Her answer surprised him. "Then why do you?" he asked. Clara carefully placed the herbs into their containers before replying. "Because someone once helped me when I had nothing. I never forgot what that kindness felt like." Alexander became quiet. He understood responsibility. He understood duty. But he had forgotten how powerful a simple act of compassion could be. Later that evening, a message arrived from the Whitmore estate. Victoria Hayes had sent a formal request demanding that Clara's arrangement be finalized immediately. She described Clara as an obligation that had been transferred, and expected the Alpha King to treat her as a political agreement. Alexander read the letter carefully. The words revealed exactly what he suspected. Clara had not been sent to him because her family valued her. She had been sent because they wanted to remove her from their lives. When Clara learned about the message, she remained calm. "I am sorry for the trouble this has caused," she said. Alexander looked at her with surprise. "Why are you apologizing?" Clara lowered her eyes. "Because I know my situation was not your choice." For a moment, Alexander saw the depth of her character. Even after being abandoned, she worried about causing inconvenience to others. "Clara," he said quietly, "you are not a burden." The words touched something inside her that she had kept hidden for years. She looked at him, almost unable to believe what she heard. In a world where people constantly measured her worth by what she could provide, the Alpha King was the first person who simply saw her as a person. And Alexander began to realize that the Omega who arrived as part of an agreement might be the one person who could change everything he believed about strength and destiny. The Northern Wolf Kingdom had always been a place where power spoke louder than words. For generations, alphas had built their reputations through strength, strategy, and authority. But after Clara Whitmore arrived, something unexpected began changing inside the royal castle. People were no longer whispering about the Omega who had been sent away by her family. They were talking about the woman who remembered everyone's struggles, the woman who treated servants and nobles with the same kindness, the woman who never allowed her painful past to become an excuse to stop caring. Clara noticed the difference, but she did not know how to accept it. She had spent so many years being overlooked that genuine respect felt unfamiliar. Every kind word made her wonder if it was temporary. Every moment of acceptance felt like something she had not earned. One morning, while walking through the castle gardens, Clara found a young servant struggling with a difficult task. Without hesitation, she offered her help. The servant looked surprised. "My lady, you do not need to do this," she said. Clara smiled. Gently. Everyone deserves support when they need it. From a distance, Alexander Ravenshair watched the scene quietly. He had seen countless people use their positions to separate themselves from others. Yet Clara, who had every reason to feel bitter, continued reaching toward people instead of pushing them away. That was the quality he found impossible to ignore. Later that day, Alexander invited Clara to join him for a walk through the royal grounds. It was the first time they had spoken without discussing arrangements or responsibilities. "You seem different from the person described in the reports," Alexander said. Clara looked at him curiously. "What did the reports say?" He paused before answering. "They said you were an Omega with little influence and no significant achievements." Clara looked down for a moment. Those words were not new to her. She had heard similar things her entire life. But instead of sadness, there was a quiet acceptance in her expression. "Perhaps they only recorded what they expected to see," she replied. Alexander looked at her carefully. "And what do you think they missed?" Clara touched a small flower growing beside the path. "That everyone has value, even when others do not notice it." Her answer stayed with him long after their conversation ended. Meanwhile, back at the Whitmore estate, Victoria Hayes grew increasingly concerned. She had expected Clara to arrive at the Northern Kingdom without anyone caring about her. She believed the Omega she sent away would disappear into a life of silence. But rumors were spreading. People were saying the Alpha King treated Clara with unusual respect. They were saying she had gained his attention not through status or family connections, but through her character. Victoria could not understand how someone she considered insignificant had become someone important. In the royal castle, Alexander continued learning more about Clara's past. Each discovery revealed another example of her quiet strength. She had spent years giving without receiving recognition. She had carried disappointment without allowing it to change her heart. And slowly, the Alpha King began to understand something he had never expected. Clara Whitmore was not a responsibility placed in his care. She was a person with a rare kind of strength, the kind that could not be measured by rank or power. The Omega who arrived at his kingdom as part of a forgotten agreement was becoming the one person he could not ignore. The days passed quietly in the Northern Wolf Kingdom, but beneath the calm surface, a storm was beginning to form. Clara Whitmore had slowly become a familiar presence within the royal castle. The servants no longer looked at her with uncertainty. The guards no longer saw her as a stranger brought from another territory. They saw the way she treated everyone with patience and respect, and they began to understand that her kindness was not a weakness. It was a choice she made every day. But while Clara was finding a place where she finally felt accepted, the truth about why she was sent away was beginning to come to light. Alexander Ravenshair had ordered his advisors to review the history of the Whitmore family agreement. He wanted to understand every detail, not because Clara was a political responsibility, but because he believed she deserved to know the truth about her own life. The documents revealed something unexpected. Clara had not been a burden to her family. She had once been considered a valuable member of the Whitmore bloodline before Victoria Hayes slowly removed her influence. After Clara's father passed away, Victoria took control of the estate and changed the way people viewed Clara. The young Omega who once had a respected place in the family became someone Victoria wanted the world to ignore. Alexander read every report carefully. The more he learned, the more he understood that Clara had been carrying an unfair weight for years. Yet despite everything, she never used her pain as a reason to hurt others. That evening, Alexander found Clara sitting near the castle library, quietly reading old records about the Northern Kingdom. "You are searching for answers," he said. Clara looked up and smiled softly. "I wanted to understand the place I now call home." Alexander sat across from her. "Do you consider this your home?" The question surprised her. For a moment, Clara did not know how to answer. She had spent years believing she belonged nowhere. "I do not know," she admitted. "I think I am still learning what it feels like to belong somewhere." Alexander looked at her with understanding. He knew what it meant to carry responsibility. He knew what it meant to stand alone while others expected perfection. But Clara carried a different kind of burden. She had been taught that she was not enough, yet she continued believing others were worthy of kindness. Before Alexander could respond, a messenger arrived with an urgent letter from the Whitmore estate. Victoria Hayes had requested a formal audience with the Alpha King. She claimed there had been a misunderstanding regarding Clara's position, and demanded that the original agreement be honored. When Clara heard the news, she became quiet. A part of her feared returning to the same place where she had spent years feeling unwanted. Alexander noticed the change in her expression. "Are you afraid?" he asked gently. Clara looked away. "I am not afraid of leaving this castle. I am afraid of remembering that I was never valued there." Her honesty affected him more than she realized. Alexander had met many people who hid their emotions behind pride. Clara did the opposite. She spoke the truth with humility. The next morning, the meeting with Victoria was scheduled. Everyone expected the Alpha King to treat the situation as a simple family matter. But Alexander already understood something important. Clara Whitmore was not a possession to be transferred between people. She was a person whose worth had been ignored for far too long. And this time he would make sure everyone heard the truth. The Grand Hall of the Northern Wolf Kingdom had never felt so quiet. Every noble, advisor, and guard stood waiting as Victoria Hayes entered the castle with the confidence of someone who believed she still held control over Clara Whitmore's future. She carried herself as if this was only a simple negotiation, another agreement that could be decided with words and influence. But she did not understand that everything had changed. Clara stood beside Alexander Ravensshire, calm and composed. The woman Victoria once treated as someone without a voice was no longer standing alone. Victoria looked toward the Alpha King and offered a polite expression. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding," she said. "Clara's place has always been decided by the Whitmore family. We only arranged what was necessary for our house." Alexander listened without interruption. He had learned that the truth often revealed itself when people were given the chance to explain their actions. "Then explain why Clara was never given a choice," he replied. Victoria paused. For the first time, uncertainty appeared on her face. She expected authority. She expected the Alpha King to focus on tradition and political benefit. She did not expect him to question the foundation of the entire arrangement. Clara remained silent, watching the conversation unfold. A part of her still felt like the young girl who stood in the Whitmore estate hoping someone would finally defend her. But another part of her knew she was no longer that person. She had survived years of being ignored, and she had learned that her value was not determined by someone else's approval. Victoria attempted to justify her actions. She spoke about family reputation, social expectations, and the importance of maintaining alliances. But with every explanation, Alexander saw the same pattern. Clara had never been treated as a person with dreams and choices. She had been treated as something that could be moved whenever others found it convenient. Alexander finally looked toward Clara. "Did anyone ask what you wanted?" Clara took a breath. The question seemed simple, but it carried years of emotions behind it. "No," she answered quietly. "No one ever asked." The hall became silent. Those words revealed more than any document could. Alexander turned back toward the gathered nobles. His voice remained calm, but every person understood the importance of what he said. A person is not a possession. A life is not a contract written by someone else. The room listened carefully. Clara Whitmore came here carrying the pain of being forgotten by those who should have protected her. Yet she still showed kindness to everyone around her. That tells me more about her character than any family name ever could. Clara looked at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. She had spent years wondering if anyone would ever see the truth beneath the rumors. Now the Alpha King was standing before everyone, making that truth impossible to ignore. Victoria lowered her gaze, realizing that the influence she once depended on no longer had the same power. Alexander stepped closer to Clara, not as someone claiming ownership, but as someone offering respect. From this moment forward, Clara's future belongs to Clara. The words settled over the hall like a promise, and for the first time in her life, Clara felt something she had almost forgotten existed: freedom. But as the room began to understand the Alpha King's decision, another truth quietly emerged. Alexander Ravensshire was not protecting Clara because of an agreement. He was protecting her because he had finally seen the person everyone else failed to recognize. The days after Victoria Hayes left the Northern Wolf Kingdom felt different for Clara Whitmore. The castle had always been a place of power and tradition, but now it carried something she had never experienced before: acceptance. For the first time in her life, Clara was not being judged by her family name, her Omega status, or what others believed she could offer. She was simply Clara. The servants who once watched her with curiosity now greeted her with genuine warmth. The guards who once wondered why she had arrived at the castle now respected the quiet strength she carried. Yet Clara still struggled to believe that everything had truly changed. Old memories did not disappear overnight. Years of being told she was not important left behind doubts that were difficult to forget. Alexander Ravensshire noticed those moments. He saw how Clara sometimes became quiet when too many people praised her. He saw how she still looked surprised whenever someone thanked her. The Alpha King understood that healing was not only about changing circumstances. Sometimes it was about learning to believe that you deserved better. One afternoon, Alexander invited Clara to visit the villages surrounding the kingdom. He wanted her to see the people she had already begun influencing without realizing it. As they traveled through the peaceful countryside, Clara noticed how differently the villagers spoke about the royal family. They respected Alexander, but they also trusted him. They knew their king listened. When they arrived at a small village near the northern forests, several families welcomed Clara warmly. She looked confused. "Why are they greeting me?" she asked quietly. Alexander smiled. "Because they know what you have done." Clara shook her head. "I have not done anything important." A village elder nearby heard her words and gently disagreed. "You helped my family when we had no one else to turn to. You gave people hope when they needed it most." Clara looked at the villagers around her and realized something she had never allowed herself to believe. Her actions mattered. Even when no one in her own home recognized her, others had seen her kindness. Alexander watched the realization appear in her eyes. He had spent years searching for people who understood the true meaning of leadership. Many wanted authority because they wanted to be admired. Clara carried influence without ever asking for it. That evening, as they returned to the castle, Alexander and Clara walked through the gardens beneath the moonlight. "You still do not realize how much people respect you," he said. Clara smiled softly. "I think I spent too much time believing the opposite." Alexander looked at her carefully. "Who convinced you that you were not valuable?" The question brought a quiet sadness to her expression. "People who only saw what I was missing," she answered. "They never looked at what I had." Alexander remained silent because he understood the truth behind those words. Many people judged others by what they lacked. Few took the time to see what they carried inside. Clara had entered his kingdom believing she had lost everything. But slowly, she was discovering that the most important things had never been taken from her. Her compassion, her courage, her ability to care. And as Alexander watched her standing beneath the northern sky, he realized that the Omega who arrived as a forgotten daughter had become someone the entire kingdom could believe in. The northern kingdom had begun to change, and everyone could feel it. The halls that once carried only discussions of power and duty now carried stories about compassion, patience, and the unexpected strength of an Omega who had arrived without a voice but earned the respect of an entire kingdom. Clara Whitmore never imagined that her life would become connected to so many people. She had spent years believing she was someone others could easily forget. Now she walked through the villages and saw people greeting her with genuine smiles, not because of her connection to the Alpha King, but because of the kindness they had experienced from her. Yet there was still one truth Clara struggled to accept. She was worthy of being chosen. Alexander Ravensheir noticed the hesitation in her heart. He saw how she accepted praise for others but struggled to accept praise for herself. One evening he found her in the royal library, carefully organizing old records and helping preserve the history of the kingdom. "You spend so much time taking care of everyone else," Alexander said. "Who takes care of you?" Clara looked up from the books and smiled gently. "I suppose I never thought about that." Alexander sat beside the table, studying her expression. "Why?" he asked. Clara became quiet for a moment. "Because I was taught that my value came from what I could give, not from who I was." The honesty of her answer stayed with him. Alexander had heard many people speak about loyalty and honor, but Clara lived those values without needing recognition. She did not help others because she wanted influence. She helped because kindness was part of who she was. As days passed, the bond between Clara and Alexander grew stronger. It was not built on the arrangement that brought her to the kingdom. It was built on trust, understanding, and the respect they had developed for each other. Alexander began sharing parts of himself that few people ever saw. He spoke about the loneliness of carrying the responsibility of an entire kingdom. He admitted that being seen as powerful often meant people forgot that he was still a person. Clara listened the way she always did, with patience and understanding. "You carry everyone's worries," she said softly. "But you should not have to carry them alone." For a moment, the Alpha King, who had always stood strong in front of others, felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel: peace. Meanwhile, the truth about Clara's past continued spreading throughout the territories. People learned that the Omega, who had been dismissed by her own family, was actually someone with remarkable character and an important legacy. The same people who once questioned her place now began questioning the decisions made against her. But Clara no longer needed their approval. She had already discovered something more important. Her worth had existed before anyone recognized it. One night, beneath the silver glow of the moon, Alexander and Clara stood together in the castle gardens. The air was calm, and the world seemed to pause around them. "Do you believe some connections are meant to happen?" Alexander asked. Clara looked at the stars above them. "I believe some people enter our lives to remind us who we truly are." Alexander smiled because he knew her words were more meaningful than she realized. For the first time in many years, the Alpha King was not searching for someone who could stand beside his title. He had found someone who could stand beside his heart. And Clara, the Omega everyone once tried to erase, was beginning to understand that destiny had never taken something away from her. It had been leading her towards something greater all along. The morning of the Luna ceremony arrived with a sense of hope throughout the northern Wolf Kingdom. The castle that once felt distant and unreachable now felt like a place where every voice mattered. The people gathered beneath the banners of the kingdom, not only to witness a royal decision, but to recognize the journey of a woman who had spent years believing she was invisible. Clara Whitmore stood in the grand hall surrounded by those who had come to know her true character. She remembered the night she left her family home with nothing but a small bag and a heart filled with uncertainty. She remembered believing that her future had been decided by people who never cared to understand her. But standing there now, she realized something important. Her story had never been about what others took from her. It was about what she refused to lose. Her kindness, her courage, her ability to believe in goodness even when the world had given her reasons not to. Alexander Ravensheir stood beside her, not as someone claiming ownership, but as a king honoring the person who had changed the way he saw strength. Before the gathered kingdom, he spoke with a calm voice that carried through the hall. A true leader does not search for someone who adds to their power. A true leader recognizes someone who brings meaning to it. Everyone listened carefully as Alexander continued. Clara Whitmore was never a burden. She was never a forgotten piece in someone else's plan. She was a person with a heart strong enough to bring hope to those around her. Clara looked across the crowd and saw many familiar faces. The servants who welcomed her. The villagers who remembered her kindness. The people who once knew only rumors but now knew the truth. She did not need to prove herself anymore. The woman who arrived at the kingdom believing, She had lost everything, had discovered that her greatest qualities had always been with her. After the ceremony, Clara walked through the castle gardens where she had spent many quiet moments learning to believe in herself again. The flowers she cared for moved gently in the breeze, reminding her of how every living thing could grow when given patience and care. Alexander joined her there, and for a while they simply enjoyed the peaceful evening. "Do you ever think about the past?" he asked. Clara looked toward the horizon. "Sometimes," she answered, "but I no longer wish to change it." Alexander looked surprised. "Why not?" Clara smiled softly. "Because every difficult moment brought me here. It taught me who I was, and it helped me understand what truly matters." Those words stayed with him. Alexander had spent years searching for strength among warriors, leaders, and powerful figures. But the greatest strength he had ever witnessed came from someone who chose compassion when the world expected bitterness. Clara had not become valuable because she stood beside the Alpha King. She had always been valuable. The kingdom simply needed time to see it. As the moon rose above the northern kingdom, the story of the forgotten Omega became a story of hope. The woman once treated as an unwanted responsibility became the Luna who reminded everyone that kindness could change a kingdom. And Alexander Ravensheir knew that the greatest decision of his reign was not a political choice or a powerful alliance. It was choosing to stand beside the woman who showed him that true strength was gentle, and that the most extraordinary hearts were often the ones the world overlooked first.